Rachel, my wife, humiliated me by saying, "You never had the guts to risk anything. You never wanted to be more than an employee who's happy with an average salary." 18 years of marriage, plus 10 years on the ranch, plus 200 people laughed at me. She didn't know that night would set me free, and that in 3 years, I'd build an $850,000 ranch while she lost everything. Before I tell you how she begged for forgiveness, hit subscribe because this twist will shock you. My name is Mark, 42 years old. 10 years waking up at 4:30 a.m. managing someone else's ranch. 18 years supporting my family on $65,000 a year. $750,000 lost in divorce and lawyers. When she left me, I thought it was the end. But she exposed me in front of all of Sheridan County until January 2023, when I bought 40 acres in Montana with my last $22,000. The night of September 15, 2022 was when my life fell apart in front of 200 people at the annual Sheridan County Cattle Ranchers Cooperative Dinner in Wyoming. I was sitting at the main table next to my wife Rachel, wearing my best Western suit, smiling at neighbors I'd known for 15 years. The community hall was decorated with hay bales, pumpkins, and American flags hanging from the ceiling. The smell of roast beef and apple pie filled the air as everyone celebrated another successful harvest season. I was 42 years old, worked as operations manager at Pathfinder Ranch for a decade, and thought my 18-year marriage was solid. We were raising 2 kids, had a modest house in Ranchester, and I believed Rachel respected me for the man I was. But that night, as the cooperative president finished his thank you speech and passed the microphone for community announcements, Rachel stood up from her chair next to me. My heart sank when I saw the determined look on her face. She took the microphone from the president's hands, adjusted her red dress that I'd never seen before, and said the words that would destroy my life in front of the entire community I called home.
Rachel looked at the crowd with a smile I'd never seen before, cold and calculated, like she was about to announce the results of a cattle auction. "Good evening, everyone," she said in a firm voice, and the hall fell completely silent. "I want to take this special moment with all our friends and neighbors gathered here to make an important announcement about my life." My stomach turned when I realized she hadn't told me anything about this. I looked around and saw confused faces. Some curious, others already starting to smile, expecting some kind of joke or surprise. After 18 years of marriage to Mark, I finally had the courage to admit something I should have done a long time ago. Rachel continued, her voice echoing through the speakers. I felt my face burn when she turned to me with a look of disgust. "I'm asking for a divorce because I deserve someone who actually has ambition in life, not a man who's happy working for others until he dies." The silence was broken by some nervous laughter, then more laughter, until half the hall was laughing at me. My boss, the owner of Pathfinder Ranch, was sitting 3 tables in front of me with a look of total shock. Rachel didn't stop there. She was just getting started. "You all see Mark as a hardworking man, reliable, always on time, always doing his job," she said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "But what you don't know is that in 18 years, he never had the guts to risk anything, never tried to build something of his own, never wanted to be more than an employee who's happy with an average salary." The laughter grew louder, and I saw people I thought were friends shaking their heads like they agreed with her. I felt my hands shaking under the table as I tried to process what was happening. My best friend, Tom, who worked with me at the ranch, was looking at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "So today, in front of all of you, I'm officially ending this marriage, and I'm starting a new life where I can finally be happy with someone who has vision for the future and isn't afraid to grow." The crowd exploded in whispers. Some clapped sarcastically, others sat with their mouths open. I stayed frozen in my chair, unable to move or speak, while I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me. Rachel put the microphone on the table, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the hall with her head held high, leaving me sitting there like a humiliated idiot. The cooperative president tried to restart the event, but the damage was done. I stood up from my chair in the awkward silence that filled the hall. Every step toward the exit felt like forever, as I felt looks of pity, disgust, and sick curiosity. Nobody came to talk to me. Nobody offered support. Everyone just watched as the man they'd known for 15 years walked out of that place carrying the weight of the biggest humiliation of his life. I got into my 2015 Ford F-250 pickup truck, closed the door, and sat there in the empty parking lot for 30 minutes, shaking, unable to start the engine. The lights in the hall were still on, the party continued without me, and I realized in that moment that my life in Ranchester, Wyoming was over.
When I finally got home that night, the house was empty and dark. Rachel had taken the kids to her sister's house in Billings, Montana, leaving only a white envelope on the kitchen table. Inside were the divorce papers, already filled out and signed by her, along with a 2-paragraph letter explaining that she'd met someone more successful 6 months ago. The man was Derek Thornton, owner of a farm equipment company in Sheridan, divorced, 15 years older than me, with an estimated net worth of over $3 million. Rachel wrote that she deserved to live with comfort and security, something my $65,000 a year salary could never provide. In the following days, the story spread through Sheridan County like wildfire. Every time I went into the farm supply co-op, the gas station, or the local grocery store, I felt the stares and heard the whispers. Some people felt sorry for me, but most seemed to think Rachel was right to leave me. A 42-year-old man who never had the guts to start his own business, I heard someone say in the bank hallway. She did the right thing looking for someone with more ambition, another voice said in the pharmacy line. The public humiliation had turned into social judgment, and I was the convicted defendant with no right to defend myself. My boss, Richard Patterson, owner of Pathfinder Ranch, called me into his office 3 weeks after the dinner. He was a 68-year-old man, tough but fair, who had hired me 10 years earlier when I was just an inexperienced cowboy. "Mark, you're the best operations manager I've ever had," he said, looking out the window at the pastures that stretched to the Bighorn Mountains. "But since that night at the dinner, I realized something I never noticed before. You work like crazy for me, but you never worked for yourself." His words hurt more than any insult Rachel had thrown. He was right, and I knew it deep in my soul. The divorce process was quick and brutal. Rachel hired the best lawyer in Sheridan, a ruthless man named Gerald Hutchins, who had a reputation for destroying ex-husbands financially. Since Wyoming is an equitable distribution state in divorces, she was entitled to half of everything we built together. Our house was worth $320,000, my savings totaled $180,000, and I had a retirement fund of $250,000, built up over 20 years of hard work. In the end, the judge ordered me to pay her $375,000 so she could keep the house and primary custody of the kids. Another $125,000 went to lawyers and legal costs. I was broke, emotionally and financially devastated. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, in December 2022, I was living in a 300-square-foot trailer on the outskirts of Ranchester. My bank account had $8,400, my truck was paid off, and I still had my job at Pathfinder Ranch. But something inside me had changed during those months of humiliation and loss.
Every night, alone in that cold trailer with the wind howling at the windows, I thought about Rachel's words at the dinner. Never had the guts to risk anything. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was right about that. I'd spent 20 years of my life working to build other men's dreams, never my own. And it was there, in that brutal Wyoming winter, that I made the decision that would change everything.
In January 2023, I quit my job at Pathfinder Ranch after 10 years of dedicated service. Richard Patterson tried to convince me to stay, even offering a raise, but my decision was made. I need to do something for myself, Richard, before it's too late, I said as I shook his hand for the last time. I sold my trailer for $18,000, added it to the $8,400 I had in the bank, and used $22,000 to buy a 40-acre piece of land in Decker, Montana, near the Wyoming border. It was raw land, no house, no fence, no running water, just wild grass, rocks, and a view of the Pryor Mountains. The nearest neighbors were 5 miles away, and the town of Decker had a population of only 200 people. With the remaining $4,400, I bought used building materials and basic tools at failed farm liquidations. For 3 months, from February to April 2023, I built a 375-square-foot wooden cabin with my own hands. It had no electricity, just a diesel generator I'd run 2 hours a day. No running water, just a well I dug manually, 40 feet deep. The Montana winter was brutal, with temperatures dropping to minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. And there were nights I thought I'd freeze to death in that poorly insulated cabin. But something strange happened during those months of loneliness and brutal work. The anger and humiliation started turning into something different, quiet determination. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., even with nowhere to go and nobody expecting me. I worked on fences, cleared land, fixed the cabin, studied cattle ranching, and used books I bought for $2 at the Billings Library. I spent entire weeks without talking to another human being, just the silence of the mountains and the work of my hands. My kids, Jacob, 16, and Emily, 14, called once a week from Rachel's house. Short, painful conversations where they asked when I was coming home. "Dad's building something new," I'd say, not knowing if they understood or just thought I'd gone crazy. Rachel never called, not once. And through the kids, I learned she'd married Derek Thornton in March 2023. In May 2023, I used my last $800 to buy 3 pregnant heifers from a 78-year-old farmer who was shutting down his operation in Hardin, Montana. They were low-quality animals, skinny, with health problems, but they were all I could afford. I built a small stable with wood salvaged from an abandoned barn, planted hay on 5 acres of land I'd prepared manually, and spent the following months caring for those 3 animals like they were gold. Neighbors who drove past on the dirt road looked with curiosity or pity at that lonely 43-year-old man trying to start a ranch from nothing. No money, no proper equipment, nothing but stubbornness. But I didn't care anymore what they thought. Every day working on that land took me further from the person I was and closer to the person I needed to become. At the end of August 2023, almost a year after the humiliation at the co-op dinner, the 3 heifers gave birth to healthy calves. They were just 3 small animals, but they were the first real result of my lonely work. That night, sitting on the porch of my rough cabin, watching the sunset over the Pryor Mountains, I realized something important. For the first time in 20 years of adult life, I was building something that was completely mine. It didn't depend on a boss, didn't depend on a wife, didn't depend on community approval. The loneliness that once felt like punishment was now my greatest ally. The silence that used to scare me was now my best advisor. And it was in that moment I understood that isolation wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Between September 2023 and March 2024, my small ranch grew slowly but steadily. I sold 2 of the calves for $1,200 each at an auction in Billings, kept 1 for breeding, and used the money to buy 5 more heifers from a ranch in liquidation. I learned to negotiate with local meat processors, to identify animals with better genetics, to maximize every dollar that passed through my hands. I worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, no vacations, no rest, no excuses. My body changed. I lost 35 pounds of fat and gained muscles I never had working for others. My mind changed too. The pain of humiliation was replaced by something more powerful: purpose. In April 2024, 18 months after starting from zero, I had 22 head of cattle and $8,500 in liquid savings. It seemed like nothing compared to the millions that men like Derek Thornton had, but it was all mine, built with sweat and sacrifice. I installed used solar panels I bought for $600 from a failed farmer, which gave me steady electricity for the first time. I built a rainwater collection system that reduced my dependence on the well. Each improvement was small, gradual, but together they meant real progress. I started documenting everything in an old notebook: costs, profits, lessons learned, mistakes made. I was becoming not just a farmer, but a rural entrepreneur. It was in May 2024 that I got an unexpected call from Richard Patterson, my old boss at Pathfinder Ranch. "Mark, I heard you're raising cattle in Decker," he said curiously. "I need someone to supply 50 quality heifers by December, and I want to give you the first chance to make a proposal." My heart raced. It was a contract worth about $75,000, more money than I'd seen in a year. But I only had 22 animals and no capital to expand quickly. "Give me a week to put together a proposal," I said, not yet knowing how I'd make it happen. I hung up the phone and for the first time in months felt something I'd forgotten: hope for something bigger. I spent 3 days and 3 nights doing calculations, researching options, calling contacts I'd made over the years. I found out I could buy 30 heifers from a ranch in liquidation in Broadus, Montana for $35,000, but I didn't have that money. I went to the bank in Billings with my record notebook, my handwritten financial projections, and a confidence I didn't know I had. The bank manager, a 55-year-old man named Robert Chen, looked at my numbers and at me. He said, "Most people who come here asking for a loan don't even know how much profit they made last month." He tapped my notebook. "You know every penny that goes in and out of this operation. That's rare." 3 days later, I got approval for a $40,000 loan, my first bank financing at 43 years old. Between June and November 2024, I worked harder than I had ever worked before. I bought the 30 heifers, invested in proper electric fencing, hired a vet to guarantee the herd's health, and managed every detail of the operation. I slept an average of 4 hours a night for 6 months, lost another 17 pounds, developed calluses on my hands that felt like leather. But on December 1, 2024, I delivered 52 top-quality heifers to Pathfinder Ranch, 2 more than the contract required. Richard Patterson paid me $78,000 by check, plus a $3,000 bonus for the 2 extras. After paying the bank loan and operating costs, I made $32,000 clear profit in 6 months. But more important than the money, I'd proven to myself that I was capable of building something real.
In January 2025, 2 years and 4 months after the night of humiliation, my ranch in Decker had 68 head of cattle, signed contracts with 3 regional meat processors, and a projected annual revenue of $180,000. I bought another 120 adjacent acres for $85,000, financed by the bank based on my perfect payment history. I built a modest 970-square-foot house with 2 bedrooms, thinking about the day my kids could visit me. My reputation as a reliable supplier of quality cattle spread through the region, and farmers who used to look at me with pity now came asking for advice. I wasn't rich, but I had something more valuable: dignity rebuilt through honest work. It was in February 2025 that I got a call from my son Jacob, now 18. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Mom and Derek," he said hesitantly.
Over the past 6 months, Rachel's marriage had publicly fallen apart. Derek Thornton had lost 2 major government contracts due to fraud accusations about his equipment. His company was on the edge of bankruptcy, and he'd started drinking heavily. Rachel, who had married thinking about financial security, was now stuck with a broke alcoholic who treated her badly. "She cries every day, Dad, and keeps saying she made the biggest mistake of her life at that dinner." I hung up the phone feeling not joy about revenge, but a deep sadness about the time we'd lost. In March 2025, I got a text message from Rachel for the first time in over 2 years. "Mark, I know I have no right to talk to you after everything I did, but I need to ask your forgiveness," the message said. She explained that Derek was broke, that they'd lost the house in Sheridan, that she was living in a small apartment and working 2 jobs to support the kids. "I was cruel, arrogant, and destroyed the best man I ever knew because of greed and vanity," she wrote. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now the value of what you always were." I read the message 3 times, sitting on the porch of my simple house, looking at the herd grazing on the hills. I didn't feel anger, didn't feel satisfaction, just a strange peace of someone who overcame something bigger than one person's betrayal. I answered Rachel's message 2 days later with just one sentence. "You didn't destroy me. You just set me free to become who I was meant to be." I didn't offer financial help, didn't offer reconciliation, didn't offer anything but closure. My kids started visiting me regularly at the ranch, working by my side on weekends, learning the value of hard work and the slow building of something real. Jacob told me he wanted to study rural business management and work with me after college. Emily, now 16, said she felt more proud of the dad who built a ranch alone than of the stepdad who had millions and lost everything. Those words were worth more than any amount of money. In September 2025, exactly 3 years after that terrible night at the co-op dinner, I got an invitation to speak at the same annual event in Sheridan County. The co-op president wanted me to share my comeback story to inspire other farmers facing hard times. I refused at first, but Richard Patterson called me personally, asking me to accept. On September 15, 2025, I stepped onto the same stage where Rachel had humiliated me and looked at an audience of 200 people, many of the same ones who'd laughed at me 3 years earlier. I didn't come here to talk about betrayal or revenge. I came to talk about how isolation and honest work can rebuild a man when he loses everything. I didn't mention Rachel once, didn't look for sympathy, just shared numbers, strategies, and the simple philosophy that guided me. Build something real, brick by brick, day after day. When I finished, I got a standing ovation. But the applause that mattered was from my 2 kids sitting in the front row, looking at their father with real respect.
Today, in November 2025, my M&J cattle ranch, named with the initials of Mark, Jacob, and Emily, has an estimated value of $850,000, includes 160 acres of land, 94 head of cattle, and guaranteed contracts for the next 3 years. I'm not a millionaire. I don't drive luxury cars, don't live in a mansion, but I wake up every day knowing that every inch of this property was built with my own hands and decisions. Rachel still lives in Sheridan, divorced from Derek, working as manager of a farm supply store. She's asked to see me a few times, but I've politely refused, not because of bitterness, but because that chapter is definitely closed. What I learned in these 3 years of isolation and rebuilding can't be summed up in one simple sentence. I learned that other people's opinions are just noise that distract us from real work. I learned that Public humiliation can be the best gift someone gives you because it forces you to face who you really are. I learned that building something from scratch, alone, in the silence of the mountains, teaches more about masculinity than any book or advice from others. My kids now know that their father isn't a man without ambition, but a man who chose to build his empire differently. Slow, solid, without shortcuts. And when I look at the sunset over the Pryor Mountains, sitting on the porch of the house I built, I don't feel pain anymore about the night I lost everything. I feel gratitude because that humiliation set me free to find my true strength.